So, what does it really mean to be marginalized? It's a word we hear thrown around a lot, but its reality, well, it shapes the lives of millions. In this explainer, we're going to break down what it is, who it affects, and why getting a handle on it is so important for seeing the world a little more clearly. I mean, have you ever had that feeling, in the schoolyard, maybe at a new job, where you just feel like you don't quite fit? Maybe you talk differently or your background isn't the same as everyone else's. That feeling of being on the outside, kind of pushed to the edges, that is the absolute core of marginalization. So, the official definition is about being forced to the fringes, not being at the center of things. But listen, this isn't just a feeling. It's a real process that can happen to entire communities for all sorts of reasons. Could be speaking a different language, being poor, or belonging to a different social group. It's a whole complex mix of things. Now, to really wrap our heads around this, let's move past the definition and get into a real human story. We're going to follow the journey of a man named Dadu and his family, because their story shows exactly how this whole process can play out. Dadu starts his story by painting this picture of a life that was just in sync with nature. His community had everything they needed. Their whole identity was tied up in their land, the forest, the river. It wasn't just a place they lived, it was their entire world. And then, just like that, everything changed. All of a sudden, these outside forces show up. Forest officials, contractors, a big mining company. And they looked at the land completely differently. They didn't see a home. They saw a resource, something to be dug up. The villagers' connection to that land, which went back generations, it meant nothing when there was iron ore underneath. The promises they were given about jobs and money, yeah, those faded away pretty fast. When the villagers tried to resist, they were met with threats, even violence. And with the powerful people backing the company, they were left with no choice. They were forced to sell the land that had been in their families forever. So what happens next? The family moves to the city, but the little bit of money they got for 30 acres of land just disappeared. They were totally cut off from their old way of life and had no skills that fit in the city. They went from being self-sufficient to being poor, all crammed into one tiny rented room. And this quote from Dadu's son, wow, it just perfectly shows how marginalization creates this ripple effect. For the kids, being uprooted meant they were totally excluded. They were outsiders at school, made fun of because they spoke a different language, and they fell behind because they'd missed so much, just completely alienated. Now, Dadu's story, as heartbreaking as it is not unique. It's the story of millions of Adivasis in India. So let's zoom out a little bit and try to understand the bigger picture for this entire community. The word Adivasi literally means original inhabitants. These are the communities with the deepest roots in the land, especially in and around forests. And we're not talking about a tiny group here. Adivasis make up about 8% of India's population. That's a huge number of people. Okay, what's so fascinating here is just how diverse this group is. I mean, we're not talking about one single culture. There are over 500 different Adivasi groups, and their societies are often really distinct from the mainstream. Less hierarchy, a deep, deep knowledge of the natural world, and really unique spiritual beliefs that are all about nature and ancestors. But all that amazing diversity often gets boiled down into these really harmful stereotypes. You know the ones. They're portrayed as exotic or backward, always just dancing in colorful costumes. The reality is so much more complex and rich. We're talking about incredible ecological knowledge and ancient languages, some of which are as old as Sanskrit. And here's a number that is just devastating. According to official data, over half, more than 50%, of all people who've been displaced because of mines and mining projects in India are Adivasis. Just think about that for a second. A group that is 8% of the population is shouldering over half the burden of this kind of so-called development. This quote from Gobindhai Moran just gets right to the heart of what's being lost. It's not just about land or money. When a community gets displaced, they lose everything that holds their society together. Their secret places, their traditions, their shared water sources, their entire way of being is just erased. Now, this pattern of being pushed aside, it's not just something that happens to Adivasi communities. To see the bigger picture, we can turn to data, because numbers can tell a powerful story about marginalization too. So let's shift our focus a bit to another group and this idea of what a minority is. This is so important. The term minority isn't just about how many people there are. As the Indian Constitution even points out, it's really about power. It's about a community that might be vulnerable to being dominated by the majority culture and could face discrimination or not have the same access to things everyone else does. All right, this table gives us a really stark snapshot of what that can look like. These aren't just numbers on a page. They represent access to basic things that people need. And you can see a noticeable gap for the Muslim community when it comes to things like electricity and tap water. Data like this points to a systemic disadvantage. Okay, now let's look at literacy, which is absolutely key for economic opportunity. The 2011 census data showed a really big gap. The literacy rate for the Muslim community was at 57%, which is pretty far below the national average. And this isn't just about being able to read. It's about access to education and all the doors that education can open. And you see that gap carry over into public employment. A community that makes up over 14% of the population has representation in the single digits in some of the most important jobs, in administration, the police, and in banking. This lack of representation means their voices and perspectives are way less likely to be heard when the big decisions get made. Seeing the same literacy data in a bar chart like this, it just makes the disparity impossible to ignore, right? That visual gap between the national average and the Muslim community's rate, that is what marginalization can look like when you turn it into a picture. It's a really clear opportunity gap. And look, these aren't just random stats we've pulled. Back in 2005, a high-level government committee, the Sachar Committee, confirmed all these trends. Their report found that on a whole bunch of development indicators, the Muslim community was lagging, with conditions that were similar to other marginalized groups like scheduled castes and tribes. They also found that school enrollment was much lower, and interestingly, they busted the myth about madrasa attendance. So whether you look at a personal story of being forced off your land or at nationwide statistics, a very clear pattern starts to emerge. What connects the experience of an Adivasi family in Odisha with the data on India's largest minority? Well, it's a shared struggle for dignity, for rights, and for a place at the center of society. And this is the fundamental takeaway here. Being marginalized is not a passive experience. These communities have long histories of struggle and resistance. The goal isn't to just blend in and lose what makes them unique. The goal is to be able to celebrate that identity while also having the exact same access to rights, opportunities, and development as everybody else. And that leaves us with this massive question. It's really the central challenge for any country with a diverse population. How do you protect all the unique cultures that make a nation so rich, while at the same time making sure that belonging to one of those cultures doesn't mean you get left on the sidelines? How do we build a center that has enough room for everyone? That's the real question, isn't it?